Me just introduce a couple of folks. Obviously, we are very blessed with a wonderful group of governing board members and foundation board members, and Boz currently serves as the vice president of the Kentucky Historical Society Foundation. We are grateful for his leadership, and where he has really challenged us is to think seriously about the intersection of history, education, and technology. And we so appreciate that passion that he's developed on our behalf. I would be remiss if I didn't also recognize Jim Crane, and he is also a very engaged board member of the Kentucky Historical Society Foundation, and appreciate Jim. In particular, at one of our recent board meetings, he reminded us not to lose sight of the power and the impact of these local organizations. I think you've got Fleming County roots, and has interacted with some of those folks recently, and so I really appreciate his commitment to the great big picture, but also helping us think community by community. So thank you, Jim. Thank you, Boz, for your leadership. I also want to introduce three of my colleagues from the Kentucky Historical Society. Scott Alvey is the assistant director. If Scott would stand for me. Some of you may remember him from the Louisville Science Center days. He was there for 15 years, did a great job, and was our good fortune when he came to Frankfurt. Trevor Jones is our director of museum collections and exhibitions. He is guarding the state constitutions, the 1792 and the 1799 state constitutions. These are not facsimiles, and so we have a highly trained professional, I won't tell you in what disciplines, guarding those constitutions as I speak. So thank you, Trevor, for being with us. And then Jim Wallace, native of Louisvillian like me and an identical twin like me. But anyway, Jim served on the state side of KHS for a number of years in virtually every position on staff, and now retired as the director of the KHS Foundation, and now serves in our development shop as well. So I'm glad to have Jim with us. So I'm going to introduce a couple of other special guests as I continue my remarks. But one thing Boz did not tell you all in the introduction was that as a child, I was a very, very accomplished artist. In fact, we probably ought to have a highly trained curator guarding this piece of art. I want you all to see this, and it's probably truthfully viewed best from afar though. Isn't it a beaut? Thank you, all right. Given its natural beauty, I'll take a half-hearted applause. I want you to know, if you could see it closely, you'd see my name up in the top left-hand corner, and you would also see the date of 1969. I said I'm a native of Louisville. I did this when I was 7 years old as part of a summer enrichment program at the Speed Art Museum here in town. So I show you this gorgeous pillowcase that I hope someday the Speed and KHS will have a knockdown drag out to see who gets it in their collection. Anyway, I did this as a summer enrichment program at the Speed Museum, and I show this to you for a couple of reasons. The first off is that there are wonderful education programs taking place at history organizations, historic sites, cultural organizations across the Commonwealth this summer, certainly across Louisville. And I would encourage you to enroll your children, your grandchildren, take them there, be a part of the magical moments that happen at these places every single day and not just during the school year. So that's the first thing I wanted you to think about, is to take your kids and grandkids to those programs. But the second reason I wanted you to see that pillowcase, and it was a Civil War scene in case you hadn't noticed the cannon with the very interesting trajectory of the cannon. I wish I could get a golf ball to do that, but that's another issue. Anyway, I bring that pillowcase and show you that picture because I think that's sort of the way we think about history a lot of times. It's maybe nostalgic at best and not particularly relevant. Ratty old pillowcase, Civil War scene 150 years ago, moving on. And I would challenge you to think about history more from the standpoint of the lessons that we learn from that history. In fact, if you think about how we at KHS, and certainly the organizations in this community and around the country and around the world, think about the Civil War, You think about those lessons that we could learn, and that study might actually reveal solutions to ongoing challenges, such as violence, such as poverty, even in this community, even in this Commonwealth. So the pillowcase was an example of not discarding the past. Don't just sort of think of it as a throwaway or irrelevant or nostalgic at best. What I'd like to do today is three things. Number one, I'd like to celebrate Kentucky's 222nd birthday. And if you didn't see the birthday cakes back there, I hope you'll either grab a piece toward the end of the program or at least admire the cake that hasn't been cut yet, that showcases one end of the Commonwealth to the other. The second thing I'd like to do today is briefly talk about the relevance of history. And then third, really looking forward to bragging on a few of Louisville's outstanding historical organizations. We talked, somebody made reference to not taking things for granted earlier, and I encourage you not to take these wonderful historical resources for granted. So first off, celebrating Kentucky's birthday. As I said, we brought cake, and I believe it was Julia Child, the wonderful chef and accomplished historian, that said, and I quote, "A party without a cake is really just a meeting." Party without a cake is really just a meeting. So let the record show this is not a meeting, this is a party because we have cake, and KHS brought it. KHS has been celebrating Kentucky's birthday with Rotary clubs all over the state, literally from Paintsville to Paducah, from Bowling Green to Covington, and we are so honored to be in my hometown today of Louisville. Second thing I wanted to talk about is the relevance of history. If you will think with me about a couple of very practical examples of how history is a part of our everyday life. If you are a new patient and going in to see the doctor, what's the first thing they ask you about after they know that they're clear on your insurance provider and that kind of information? Understood. But what's the first thing they ask you about? They say, "Tell me about your medical history." Absolutely. That past information is going to have a profound impact on the treatment that you receive, and preventative or otherwise. Another example, I know there are a lot of folks from the financial community. Boz obviously leads that charge, but there are others. But there are a lot of us also that are involved in nonprofits, and all of us look at our personal finances. And when those statements come, whether they're your personal statements, your business, or an organization on which you serve, you don't just see the current activities, the monthly activities. You compare that oftentimes to the previous year. A very practical use of the past. One more example that I'm sure a number of you in the legal profession think about. I guarantee you there's not an attorney in this room that goes in to try a case without that case being solidly grounded in historical precedent, legal precedent. Once again, a very practical use of the past. In fact, it reminds me of a great quote. William Faulkner once said, "The past is never dead. It's not even past." The past is never dead. It's not even past. Well, at KHS, and certainly within most businesses and organizations, we've had to reinvent our business model, particularly over the last 4 to 5, 6 years. And that's thanks to a very challenging economy. And it's also thanks to the opportunities and the expectations brought on by the continued explosion of technology. So, as a part of rethinking our business model, we began to think about relevance. That has become the watchword at the Kentucky Historical Society. Boz talked about that. I'd like to say a little bit about that as well. And we've thought about, so what does a state historical society look like in the 21st century? And we've zeroed down on 3 very specific needs that history, we think, can help meet. You wouldn't have thought of a state historical society meeting critical needs, but we think we are a part of that. History shapes our sense of identity, and that sense of identity in terms of who we are as individuals, who we are as families, as communities, as Kentuckians. Several references to Dr. Thomas D. Clark. I'd be curious to know, did any of you take history at the University of Kentucky from Dr. Clark? I see several hands. I'm surprised there aren't more in the room. At one point I thought, gosh, he must have had 6 million students. Everybody I ran into was a student of Tom Clark's at UK. If ever a building needed a name on it, the History Center in Frankfort needed to have Tom Clark's on it. It is such an honor for us to be the Thomas D. Clark Center for Kentucky History. But if you look at the side of that building, Dr. Clark made a comment that we put there that said, "So all Kentuckians may discover their roots in time and place." If you think about Abraham Lincoln, one of the most, probably the most well-known Kentuckian, even he, long after he left the state, had that sense of connection, that sense of identity. In fact, we know he wrote it. We don't know if he said it or not, but we know he wrote in 1860 during that presidential election when he made a stop to Cincinnati. He wrote in his prepared comments, "I too am a Kentuckian." Now, he may have been thinking about those voters across the Ohio River when he made that stop, but he very clearly identified himself as a Kentucky. We think of that as being rooted or connected, and that sense of identity has a real practical value to us in the sense that it can be used to motivate us to rise above present circumstances. So, history helps meet the need of creating that sense of identity. Number two, history helps us develop valuable skills. Kentucky was among the first states in the country to adopt the 21st century skills approach to education. Some of you may know about the 4 C's: critical thinking, collaboration, creativity, and communication. Let me give you a real-life example. About 2 years ago, we had a group of Kentucky business people meeting at KHS, and they were discussing the development of high-tech manufacturing across the I-64 corridor. This was known as the BEAM Initiative. Some of you may have heard of that. But these business leaders were talking about creating a more agile workforce. That was really what they needed. And they were trying to prepare young people for jobs that hadn't even been invented yet. Well, how in the world do you do that? If you don't even know what that job's going to be, how can you train somebody? And that's sort of the beauty of the 21st century skills approach and the C3 framework and all those kinds of things. They said we can train people if we will have them focus on core skills that equip them to adjust and adapt. And we would argue that history is tailor-made to developing several of these skills, especially critical thinking, analyzing data, interpreting content, problem solving. All these things are part of the historical process. But our organization and really our profession's behavior is going to have to change dramatically. Rather than making a student, and they come by the tens of thousands to KHS each year, rather than that student coming to KHS and putting their hands in the pocket and being told, be quiet and don't touch anything, what we're trying to say is roll up your sleeves and make a deep dive, explore deeply. What we were doing is, in some cases, inadvertently denying that thrill of the chase, that sense of exploration, and then the discovery comes. Well, golly, not only do you know content, but you've developed these really incredible skills that will serve you well for a lifetime, whether you're a historian or not. And so we would argue that history, if we behave properly within our profession, provides great skills that leads to a very agile workforce in the 21st century. But this requires access to historical materials, and we were great about doing this with our collections for years. You know, we got to preserve that forever, don't get near it. That's why I'm so proud of those 2 documents sitting back there in the corner. This is a new day. We are responsibly bringing these things and making them accessible to you all. We have made them accessible online. We are loaning them all over the country. That's what we think a 21st century state historical society looks like. We can't do that with these. There's no substitute for encountering original material. You know, we live in a fabricated virtual world, and so to come face to face with the authentic is a very powerful experience. The third thing I wanted to mention in terms of the relevance of history is not only does it shape our sense of identity, it develops important lifelong skills, but ultimately, and Boz touched on this, Crit Llewellyn has talked obviously about this, ultimately history can help Kentucky leaders make informed decisions. We're talking about both public and private sector. Maybe the best way to describe it is another pivot that our field needs to make, and that is shifting away from a temple where the past was revered and worshiped. Part of our past should be revered, but all of it we can learn from. But we ought to shift away from a temple, and we need to become more of a forum where the issues of the day can be put in a historical context with a keen eye on making good decisions for a better future. And I don't think we're overselling the value of history or the relevance of history. We can become that forum, not just the Kentucky Historical Society, but all of these kinds of organizations. And so needless to say, we are passionate about this. We are excited. You know, you go through an economic downturn and you wonder, does anybody care? Do we really make any difference? And when you hit rock bottom, you realize you're still alive and kicking. And then you realize we matter more than we ever realized before, but we've got to behave differently. Now, the last thing I want to do is take a minute to brag on a few of the historical organizations here in Louisville. As I said, please don't take them for granted. These are fabulous resources. I want to introduce my good friend and colleague, Mark Wetherington, who is the executive director of the Filson Historical Society, and things are really rocking and rolling over there. Mark, that was one of the coolest groundbreakings I have ever attended a couple of weeks ago. Mark and I go back to East Tennessee days, and grateful for his friendship for years and years. But the Filson has world-class research collections, and they do fabulous programming. My parents recently moved back to Prospect, and they're at the Filson all the time. Mark, I tell you, they just can't get enough of that fabulous programming. But we're talking world-class collections at the Filson. I want to introduce Jody Lewis. Jody, if you wouldn't mind standing up. Jody is the Director of Education for the Fraser History Museum. The Fraser, you know, just right down the street, is a terrific museum, and it has grown up in a hurry and has carved out a fabulous niche, not only in this community, but obviously nationally and internationally. We have been honored at the Kentucky Historical Society to host one of their major exhibitions on the Civil War, My Brother, My Enemy. A great job, and so we've got that kind of collaborative relationship. It doesn't stop there, though. We've tried to get access to our collections, and a lot of people have been borrowing those, not the least of which the Fraser. So we are excited to see some of our richest collections work their way into exhibitions at the Fraser, and they do fabulous programming. We're very proud to work closely with the Fraser and appreciate you being here today, Jody. Colleen Wilson, if you would stand up as well. Colleen is the Director of Education. She is with the Sons of the American Revolution. Their national headquarters are here in Louisville, and you all are probably aware about a major capital building program. In fact, they're just finishing up this first phase. She had to slip out of a meeting early just this week to visit with the contractor and a hard hat tour. I believe you're moving into collection storage and the research library. National headquarters for the Sons of the American Revolution. You know, not only is that a lineage organization, but that's an organization that is challenging people of all ages to think about citizenship and what does civil discourse look like in the 21st century. Goodness knows we need as much of that as we can get. And so I'm so excited to have Colleen and Jody and Mark here. There are other partners that we work with throughout Louisville and obviously across Kentucky. But I got to tell you, because of this momentum, among the historical organizations in this community and across the state of Kentucky, we have worked with the Louisville Convention and Visitors Bureau to land a national professional meeting. The American Association for State and Local History is coming to Louisville in September of 2015, and we will be sort of the center of the public history universe for about a week in September 2015. We're so excited to show off not only the hospitality of this community and this state, but these wonderful historical organizations that are rethinking and progressively trying to make a difference. As we said, William Faulkner, the past is never dead, it's not even past. We're going to be living that in a huge way as we bring this national meeting to Louisville. But I want to tell you just quickly about the theme. The theme for that meeting is the power of possibility. And you all have heard that a good bit from the Convention and Visitors Bureau people and other folks in this community. But I love one of the historical examples of that. It's all tied into the falls of the Ohio. Folks are coming down the Ohio River, and obviously the falls are tough to navigate. Well, the power of possibility. They got off, they thought this through, and they figured out how to either work around or get over those falls. But all the while, the city of Louisville begins to emerge. And so we thought that that was a perfect theme for this community because it's in Kentucky's and in Louisville's DNA. So I would love to get you all involved. We'd love for you to be a part of that hospitable community that they will enjoy, about 1,000 or 1,200 of our closest friends in the field. But we'd also like to think about best practices beyond our field, whether it's market research or communications or organizational culture or whatever it is. And there are people in this audience that have that kind of expertise, and we'd love to tap into that while that national conference is here. So anyway, I just want you guys to know how much we appreciate this community and particularly his historical organizations. And as I close, I want to do one more thing, and that is I want to point you to a couple of things at your table. There are impact reports that talk a little bit about what we've been doing. And if you saw the birthday cake, this will look familiar. That's what the birthday cake looks like. The other thing I'd like to do is I'd like to present to President Randy an expression of our appreciation, maybe can hang in the Rotary office, naming the Louisville Rotary Club a history advocate during the 222nd birthday of Kentucky. So thank you, Randy. Thank you. Appreciate your all support of history.